Hi there, I'm Nicole Heisterman from Inline Physiotherapy. I'm a physiotherapist and an accredited bike fitter. I'm here for this week's version of Sweet Skills Tips and Tweaks. Today we're going to talk about setting up your suspension. Setting up your suspension is really important on our mountain bikes because we spend a lot of money on our bikes, and the more they're set up for our specific riding style and weight, the more we're going to get our money's worth out of this really nice expensive bike we just spent a whole bunch of money on. So first thing we want to do when we set up our suspension is have a place where you can sit on your bike and hold on to something to balance so that you can get your full weight on your bike. Once you can do that with a counter or a lamppost or the back of your truck or whatever you need to do, but just have a place where you can just touch down so you can hold yourself upright while you have your full weight on your bike. First thing we're going to do is set up the rear suspension. When you go to set up your suspension, make sure that both of the fork and the rear suspension are in their open travel mode. So that's the full travel, no trail mode, no closed mode, and that's the mode that you would use to ride when you're riding downhill and you want full travel. To set up the rear suspension, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to bring this little washer all the way up onto the shock body. If you don't have this little washer, some of us have fallen off, you can use a zap strap, and you can put the zap strap firmly around the shock and pull it tight, and then it'll sit right at the bottom, just like this washer. We're going to use where this washer moves to determine how much sag we have. Okay, so for the sag adjustment, we want to start with, in the rear, you want to have about 25 to 30% sag. It depends on your style of riding. If you are more interested in firming up your rear suspension so that it climbs better, or you want to ride smoother terrain, you can have it on a lower amount of sag. If you want your bike to perform more on, bigger bumps, on rougher terrain, then you want to have more sag. So you can decide how much you want between about 25 and 30%. Around here, people usually choose between 25 and 30. So you're first going to just hop on your bike. It doesn't matter if the seat's up, because it just matters that your full weight is on the bike. And then all you're going to do is sit on your saddle, just holding on to something. You don't have to stand up or anything to do the rear suspension. And then all you're going to do is just smoothly climb off the bike so that it doesn't bounce. As you can see, the shock has gone through a certain amount of the travel when I get off my bike. So now what I want to do is measure how much of that sag have I actually used. So I can get out any sort of ruler will work, or a tape measure, and you're just going to measure, I'm not sure what the best way to do this, like so, and you're going to measure the full stroke length. So the full stroke length on this shock is about, I'm going to call that about 55 millimeters, or 5.5 centimeters. And I have right now about 1 centimeter of sag, or 1.2 centimeters of sag out of 55 centimeters full stroke length. So we can do the math. And okay, so quick calculation reveals that of 55 millimeters, 25% would be about 14 millimeters, and 30% would be about 16.5 millimeters. So looking at the sag here, we're at about 12 millimeters. So in this case, if I want to ride some gnarly downhills and have it feel really plush, I want about 30% sag. So that means I want to take a little bit of air out and have a little bit more sag.
I think you better take air out, Nicole.
We're about to ride some really rowdy stuff, Sylvie, so I better take some air out of this. So what I'm going to do, for those of you who haven't used the shock pump before, don't be intimidated. It's really easy. So again, just making sure before you adjust the pressure that the shock is in its open mode, because that's the mode where it's going to get the maximum sag. And we always want to adjust it when it's in that mode. So most of our shocks should have a little cap on them. Most of the time you wouldn't be doing this out on the trail, so you can put this in a safe place that you're not going to lose it. And then you just attach the shock pump. It screws on. Once the shock pump is screwed on, you'll see the little needle on the pump move up. And this one is reading about 140 psi. So I was going to take some air out to get a little bit more sag. So I'm going to take it down to about 130. Don't be afraid to play with this. It's just air. If it's too saggy, you just put a little bit more in. No big deal. So don't be afraid to play with this. So to let the air out, there's usually a little button on the shock pump. So you just push that button and watch the needle move down. I'm going to take 10 psi out and then unscrew this. And you'll feel a little bit of air come out when you unscrew it. Don't panic about that. That's just the air that's in this little chamber. So after you've changed the air in the shock, you want to cycle the shock through its travel a few times. And this is important because you won't get an accurate reading of what it's going to actually look like if you don't cycle it through. So I usually get people to ride their bike down the street and jump up and down on it, or in this case I can just ride down this little rocky section and then ride back up and bounce around a few times. So I'll go and do that and I'll be right back. So now I'm back from bouncing around and cycling that shock through. Now I'm going to just bring the little washer up, recheck my sag, sit on my bike, and then slowly hop off. And then I can recheck my measurement and see where my sag is now and see if it's where I want it. Don't forget to put the little cap back on when you're finished. If you would want to continue to adjust the sag, you just attach your shock pump, take air out or put air in as required. Excellent. Now we're ready to roll on the back end. And now when it comes to the front end, same idea. We want to put our fork in full open travel mode. So now you're going to find the little washer that gives you an indicator of your sag. In my case, I don't have a washer on mine, so I'm going to use a little zap strap. You can just put the zap strap on either fork leg, tighten it up, and then slide it down to the top of the lower. Then what you're going to do is get on your bike. You don't have to put the seat up, but all you're going to do is stand up, and you want to get enough weight on the front end that it's like you're in your descending position. You don't have to bounce up and down. You don't have to lean forward and really do anything crazy. You just have to, if you do something crazy like I just did, you just move it back down. You just stand up, get into your position that you would be in when you're descending. Something like this to lean against is great. If you haven't got something that good, you can do it with one hand. I prefer to have both hands on the handlebar. Someone can hold on to the front of your bike for you, whatever you need to do. Then you gently sit down, hop off, and then we see which percentage of sag we have. So now we've weighted our fork, and now we can determine what the sag is in that sort of neutral weighted position. So again, just like we did with the rear, I'm going to measure the stroke length of my fork, and this is 150 mils or 155 when you look at the full strength length of that stanchion, and 20% of that would be 30, just over 30 mils, and this one is at 32. So that is 20% sag. Typically we'll set the sag up somewhere between about 15, 20, maybe 25% depending on the rider. The thing we need to be careful about when we're setting up sag is we don't want to lose all of our fork. If it's too saggy, then we lose all our travel, and now we're running a shorter fork, and that's going to bring our handlebars down and steepen our head angle. So we need to be really cognizant of how we set up that sag. Typically we'll do about 20%, and depending on rider preference and the type of terrain you like to ride, you can tweak that depending on your own preferences. So if your sag isn't where you want it, simply undo the cap on the top of the fork here. Thread your shock pump on just like we did on the lower one. You'll know it's threaded on enough when it's just snug and the little needle moves up. Record where the pressure is when you start and take out or put in air as required to get to the sag that you're looking for. When you're finished, take the shock pump off, cycle the fork through half a dozen times, make sure that you're really getting that air cycling through the shock, and then push your washer back down, sit on your bike again, and test your sag and measure it again. If you're having trouble getting your fork to get to an appropriate sag and it's still feeling really stiff, or you just don't seem to be able to get it to set up properly for you, remember that for girls, and especially smaller girls, and especially those of you who are maybe just getting started and you're not riding super fast, the forks are often not really designed for really lightweight people like us, and men have way more weight in their shoulders than we do, and so we're often not really getting enough weight over our fork to compress the fork and have it work properly in the standard settings. So if you're struggling to get your fork to feel plush or to have the right amount of sag and it's just feeling like it's not working, then make sure you get in and see somebody who specializes in suspension tuning, because there are things they can do with the internals to make that shock work better for you. So now we've got our fork set up with our great amount of sag. Our rear suspension is all tuned up and ready to go for our weight and riding style. So let's get out there and have some fun.